Hello again, it's Andrew from Iconic Studios, and yet again I'm here with Joe. How are you, honey?
I've decided to come back and help you out again.
Yeah, a lot of people sort of messaged me directly and said, you didn't really let Joe do anything. She did lots of stuff. She was holding that camera and making sure everything worked. Couldn't have done that video without her. But what I will say from, going forward, you're probably going to hear a lot more of Joe reading stuff and characters and things like that, and me doing a lot of the explanation. So this is what we're doing in that isolation thing again. I'm going to mention it just in case some people jump to this video rather than going and watching the first one. However, I would recommend go back and watch that. For all the people who've seen the original video, you've seen the prototypes, you've seen the hidden images, you've seen a lot of the cool stuff as we've been going along, and the feedback's been really positive about that, so thank you very much for watching that. So today we're going to cover the action phase, but we're also going to cover the first sort of awakening, as we call it, where the characters start the game, just so you have an idea of what to expect from the starting of a game. Now, I'm going to give a full spoiler disclosure warning as well from this point going forward. We will reveal certain elements of story, certain elements of beginnings of characters and things like that as we're going forward. So if you're one of those people that want to go in completely new to this and not experience the written story elements of the game, it's really important that you sort of turn back now and concentrate on that original setup video. So we're going to start with that awakening. So the awakening involves the personal story deck, okay? And this personal story deck has a story purely for Dixon, who is our detective type character, and a lot of details listed on there. Now, Joe's going to be starting as this character today, and I'll just hand you that card. So we'll make a start now, and let's see what Dixon's story sounds like.
So, we can see we've got Detective Colby Dixon there, and it looks as though the story begins with the Hilltop Butcher in Hilltop Housing.
Ta-da!
Is that where we've started?
That's why we've started there.
Brilliant.
Surprise, surprise. It's not like we planned it at all.
Not at all. So we've got 55-year-old gruff detective Colby Dixon has seen a lot in his 30 years on the force, but nothing like this latest string of murders. A serial killer known as the Hilltop Butcher has been hunting the city's wealthiest residents. The butcher cuts their throats with a jagged blade, then puts them on display naked in dark alleyways for all to see. Written on their chests are the words, "I am not one of you," and all their pearls, cash and watches are left intact. This latest body, however, is different to the others. The bloody artist has fled before finishing their painting. Were they disturbed, or are they getting sloppy? Dixon arrived at the scene first, drunk on scotch and stinking of stale smoke. As he inspected the area, he found an unusual pair of cracked sunglasses. Looking through the broken lens, the victim's face changes in ways he can't explain. Test stealth.
So we need to test stealth. So first of all, you'll see we're going for a sort of a gritty story as we go through this, and there's going to be lots of investigatory work when you're playing as Dixon. But we need to test his stealth. Now remember, stealth isn't just sneaking up on people, it's awareness of that situation. He's found these glasses, what's he going to do? So we need to roll stealth. So we're going to look at Dixon's card, and you'll see his stealth is currently a 3. Right. So that means we have 3 dice. Joe, do you want to do the honours? Or?
Would you do the honours, seeing as I've got all this camera work going on in front of me, if that's all right?
Okay.
However,
yeah,
if things go to pot, it's your fault.
Okay, thanks. Thanks for that. So as you can see, we've gone with kind of larger dice to have a little bit of fun. There is going to be a dice cup in... Oh, well, that one will count. 3 chew bubble gum, which means I've completely epically failed that roll. 3 chances, and I've messed it all up.
Great
fun. Read us the sort of ending to that, since I've completely butchered it.
To see. So, fail. So get the hell off my crime scene, shouts the senior officer. Dixon places the glasses back beside the body, then hurries out in the alleyway in search of the truth.
So you can see we've not been successful there, and the idea is that you would jump to the failure result. You don't read the positive result normally, and that doesn't affect his overall story. It's almost like a mini tutorial for each person playing the game. Now, I can reveal without revealing the text. I mean, you might have been able to read it on the camera, but if Dixon was successful, he would have managed to escape with a pair of glasses, and that would have given him a glasses token that he could then use for later work, you know, either investigating other players, investigating the board, and other actions that we'll talk about. Also, as it's Dixon's first starting card, he starts with the Federal 45 and no other additional items, which basically means he has his base stat to look at. So that's the opening for Dixon. Every player will then go through one of these scenarios where they'll read to the group, and it sets the scene for what's happening with these characters. You know, you now know that Dixon's, you know, one of the sort of old school cop, you know, a little bit of scotch, you know, sort of very much that old classic noir detective, and that story is going to go throughout the campaign within the They Live universe. So now we've got that starting out of the way, let's move on to the actions that can take place. Let's have a look at the action phase. So, a few things just to clear things up. Obviously, you wouldn't normally have your character board laid out on the board like this with everything monopolising the whole area, and you wouldn't have your characters facing up like this. We're doing this purely so it's more visual for you and that you can see what we're trying to demonstrate here as part of the action phase. Now, within the action phase, you always get 3 different actions that you can complete. So what we're going to demonstrate here is how you can use these actions in different combinations to complete different tasks as we work our way along. This mainly is broken down to a list of actions which you can find in the rulebook, and we're going to demonstrate here, and also what we call a free movement action. And that free movement action can take place in any order in the action phase, so you can use that any time within that action phase. It doesn't need to be a free movement at the beginning or a free movement at the end. You'll see why as we go along. So we're going to start off by demonstrating movement. You can very simply make a movement to any adjacent space with a red dot or a red pin by following the strings. Okay, so your first movement could be from here to 24, and then if you wanted to use that additional free movement, we could move down to the resettlement billboard at 25, but we couldn't use 3 movements, so we couldn't go 1, 2, 3, for example. So for this purpose of today, we're going to move to 24 with our first movement, and we're going to move to 25 with our free movement. This will then allow us to complete our next action. So the next action would be to lay low. So laying low is a really important action. It allows you to rest and recover your health, and it also allows you to hide from the authorities and lower your overall wanted rating. This has a large impact on the way that the game plays. Your wanted rating, for example, can impact your stealth rolls as people are looking for you. It can also mean that certain cards will have negative impact due to you having a lower stealth ability to roll. So as you can see here, we've got 1 damage token, which we've got there. We decided to go the damage token route rather than giving you a load of health tokens, purely so you weren't constantly stacked with 7 or 8 tokens. It makes it a little bit easier. And then we've got 1 wanted token, which we've acquired. So what you would do with Dixon's token, to lay low, you would lay the token down and you would remove these 2 immediately. So that now means Dixon's stealth goes back up to 3, and it means his health is back up to 7. He can then at the end, he has to make sure he uses the lay low as his last action in the turn, as he'll be hiding. So you can't use your lay low halfway through a turn by moving, laying low and then moving. It must be your last action. It's also worth noting that you can't lay low on a space that is occupied by an enemy, as they may be looking for you. The next action that can be completed is trading. Now, to trade, you must be on the same space. So you can see here we have Nada and Frank on the same space, who can then trade with each other. Certain allies and equipment and skills may give you the ability to trade over long distances, but in general, most characters must trade by being in the same location. Okay, now, trades can sort of occur in 2 ways. First of all, you can trade items equally. So you might have one person who has a ration pack and you might have one person who needs a shotgun. In my opinion, that's a pretty uneven trade. But you can trade them and then both characters will have those items. You can also perform one-way trades. So you might have an ally who really needs some health and you should want to show a bit of charity. So Nada may give Frank a ration pack to recover his health. So trades don't have to be equal. They can be for large amounts of cards as well. The next action is Reorganize. As we discussed in the setup video, you can only carry a certain amount of items and have a certain amount of items equipped at one time. For example, Dixon here has the Federal 45 equipped in the weapon slot. To equip a different weapon, he would need to reorganise. He has a number of items in his backpack, and if you kind of imagine it, it's like him taking a backpack off and reorganising the items and deciding what he wants to carry. So in this instance, the Federal 45 takes the weapon hand, and Dixon also has a Tech 9mm and also an army ration pack. Now, he may want to equip this gun. This gun is a two-handed weapon, and as a result takes up 2 slots, so we recommend putting them in the middle, as we said previously. And now he has that equipped. However, in the future, if Dixon would want to heal, he's got both hands full, which creates a problem. So he may need to reorganise to be able to stop and heal himself. Remember, this is really important, as you cannot use the same action in the same turn. So Dixon would not be able to swap out for the ration pack, use it, and then swap back to his machine gun. He would need to do that over a period of turns. So in this instance, to reorganise himself, what would be the sensible option would be to swap the Tech 9 for his Federal 45 and the ration pack, and then use the action to use the ration pack, discarding it down to the discard pile, to recover his health. That overall would be the best possible action. Then the next turn, Dixon would be able to swap back to his more powerful weapon. The next action is quite a heroic one. It's also one that can be used to manipulate the way that enemies move around the board. The next action is called Distract the Authorities, and what you do is you take one wanted token and receive that basically by causing a nuisance, punching somebody in the street, shooting a gun, whatever you think may cause a nuisance in the street, that's what you do to achieve that. And perhaps you can have a little bit of fun with this from a roleplay element within the game, I don't know, you decide to expose yourself to somebody in the middle of the street and as a result receive a wanted token. However you decide to do that, distracting the authorities is a useful thing. It does come with a penalty of receiving wanted, which can come with risks, but when you might have a character who's quite strong and maybe there's another character that's injured, this could be useful for manoeuvring enemies around the board, which we'll demonstrate later in the response phase. The next action that you can complete is called Inspecting. Now, you have an option with Inspect. You can either inspect your inventory to see what you have and see which items may have sort of alien invader images, or you may have human images, and that's going to be really useful for when deciding what to discard and what to sort of pay in or deposit at resistance stashes. Or alternatively, you can inspect the world around you. Now, this is a separate thing, so you either choose to inspect your inventory or you choose to inspect the world around you. Inspecting the world around you means that you can check the billboards to see which ones of them have different logos on them. This is really important for later, and I'll show you why now. So this billboard here has the following hidden image. So let's have a look. And that has consume on there. And that's great, but in the future there may be situations where there is more than one consume logo. So it means that because you have a total of 3 different ones of these, when you're exchanging them later on, it may work out better odds to place items at places that have less chance of being raided. For example, there are 3 billboard locations. If 2 of the 3 billboard locations say consume on them, that means if a raid happens for consume, 2 of those locations will be raided at the same time, and it will mean that any items that have been stashed there, which we'll discuss later, so items that have been stashed there like so, will be removed by the authorities and you will lose them. So it's probably more to your advantage to keep an eye on the board and keep an awareness of the environment around you to make sure that you haven't got a situation where all 3 raid boards are perhaps the same, meaning that it's probably not the best time to deposit your items. So you've got a choice with that inspect the world around you to find out what the current locations have on them as a hidden item, or alternatively to inspect your inventory and work out what items you have and what are going to be useful for your final assault. The next action is crafting, which is another dual action. You can perform 2 different types of crafting actions which will give sort of different outcomes. So the first simple outcome is to scrap a weapon, or to break down a weapon to its components for our currency that's called scrap. You do this by taking the card, placing it in the discard pile, and you receive a scrap token for doing so. It doesn't matter how good the weapon is or how poor the weapon is, you always receive 1 scrap unless otherwise stated. If you get to the point where you have 3 scrap tokens, you can use the other crafting facility. So the other crafting ability that you may have is by spending these 3 scrap tokens to receive 1 glasses token. As you can see, this is quite useful in combination with your inspect ability. If you inspect items that are in your hand and they have invader symbols on them, you'll want to get rid of those and discard them to remove them from the game and prevent them being used. However, if you're an invader, you may want to keep those items and to discard the resistance items. So it all does depend on if you're playing as an invader or a human. The next action is for using an item or character action. So we touched on one of these already with the army ration pack. So the army ration pack, if it's equipped and in his offhand, can be used to recover life, and then it's placed in the discard pile. We've already covered that one, pretty simple. There are additional items that also may be multi-use items that you don't have to discard after use, but it is important to read their write-up and see what you can do with each of those items. The other thing is actions, and the characters have some passive abilities and some abilities that require specific actions. So for example, this character, Dixon, has an ability called 999 shots fired. That means he can make an additional movement directly towards another player with a level of 1 wanted or higher. So if Nader or Frank had a wanted token, he could also make an additional movement towards them. So, in this instance of the game, if he was 3 spaces away, he could make his movement, an additional movement, and also then a further movement towards them to enable him to get closer to them if they had a wanted rating. So it's quite useful, and if used in conjunction with other players, maybe another player has decided to use one of those actions to distract the authorities and gain a wanted token previously to allow you to move quicker towards them. It's a great way of bringing the team together, which can be really useful. It's also a great way of pursuing either invaders or humans that you want to hunt down with this character, so that's really cool. He also does have a passive ability there. When he was laying low, or when we were discussing laying low earlier, you see he can also remove an additional wanted token instead of recovering health. So if he had 2, he could recover that. And you see how that one is tied to a previous action. So if you were laying low at the end of that turn, you would also take into account that action, and it wouldn't class as an action. It would only be classed as the lay low action. So you either use specific unique actions, or alternatively, you can use equipped items. The final action is what we call special movement. Now, this is basically using the freeway to move across the board quite quickly. Now, This is very important that you pay attention to this, because there's specific things where you will acquire wanted tokens and you won't acquire wanted tokens. So the freeway, which is point 23, point 17 and point 2, allows you to traverse very, very quickly, and you follow the arrows along the board, making those movements. For every space that you move along the freeway, you will acquire wanted tokens. So you can move onto the freeway, you can stop on the freeway, that will not gain you a wanted token. However, if you move from point to point, so from point here to point here, you will acquire 1 wanted token. If you then move further along, up to point 2, thank you for that, Joe, you will acquire a total of 2 wanted tokens. Now, this can be a good way of getting across the board, but obviously there is a punishment, and that can affect you in your stealth rolls, and it can affect you in certain instances throughout the game, so it is something you should use sparingly. In addition to that, it is worth mentioning that moving across the freeway doesn't affect you. So, for example, if you move on to 23 and then move across to 22, you're not travelling along the freeway, so that doesn't impact you or doesn't gain you any additional wanted tokens. So just something to bear in mind. They're all the actions that we've covered today. I hope you've enjoyed that breakdown and understand how you can interact with the game in this phase. We'll next be moving on to the response phase, where you can see how the actions that you've taken impact the world around you. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you next time.